Hi, 7th graders. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit today about Hinduism. Now, Hinduism, there's a lot of things we're going to go over. Probably you're not as familiar with Hinduism as you may be with the other religions. It is the third largest religion in the world, making up about almost 14% of the population with 1 billion followers. Almost all of them are in India. Some of them are also in the country of Nepal, which is close to where Mount Everest is located. One interesting thing is that there's no clear founder of Hinduism. As we covered before when we learned about the Indus Valley, there was a group called the Aryans, and they were polytheistic, and I think a lot of their beliefs in religion kind of formed with some other beliefs in the area to create what we view now as Hinduism. And Hinduism doesn't look the same to every single person. To me, it seems to be more of a religion that is more centered around the family. So a family may have their own shrine in their home and worship a certain set of gods, where another family may look completely different. So whereas the other religions we've talked about up to this point, it seems like all believers kind of agree on the same common ideas. That's not the case with Hinduism. It's definitely a little bit more harder to define key characteristics that all Hindus would believe in. There's a lot of stuff here about the history. I'm going to kind of skip past most of that because it's really the beliefs that I want to kind of center upon. So, as I just said, that there are multiple gods in Hinduism, we would classify this as a polytheistic religion. And probably one of the most interesting things I think about this is that I think Hindus would classify themselves as not being polytheistic at all, because they would see all things relating back to this idea of Brahman. I'm going to highlight that here so you can see that. Oh, I didn't do what I was supposed to do there. I'm going to go back to that slide again. So Brahman is the single universal spirit that all Hindu gods are a part of. So no matter all the gods we talk about, they all come back to Brahman. You might think of it in some ways as like Father, Son, Holy Spirit with Christianity, but that is a pure monotheistic approach, just three in one. Whereas this is all gods kind of a part of one universal spirit. So in that way it does seem kind of monotheistic. One of the gods is called Brahma, not to be confused with Brahman, and is the creator of the universe, has 4 faces. A lot of these gods also have different avatars, ways that they're shown and represented. There's also Shiva, who is the destroyer. Definitely seems to be kind of more fierce and somewhat violent. There's Vishnu, the preserver. He destroys demons. He also preserves order. Often shown, his avatar is often shown as this blue color. You might wonder about the multiple hands, like do they believe God has multiple hands? I think it's kind of the symbolism that God can be everywhere and involved in multiple things all at the same time. So it's not necessarily they believe that God looks like this, it's an avatar to represent the characteristics of God. And there's also Ganesha, which is often shown with an elephant head. It's the god of wisdom, arts, and science. So kind of interesting, is one of the few gods that I know of in Hinduism that has kind of more of this animal-like characteristic. As far as sacred texts go, there's kind of 2 main parts. One of them is the Vedas, and then I mentioned earlier there was something called the Upanishads as the other part that kind of explains the Vedas. And I think you would see that back on the earlier side. So the Vedas are one of the most important holy texts, and they're considered to be authorless, and there's 4 different Vedas. Now, one thing we also talked about earlier when we did cover the Indus Valley is that the Aryans brought in something called the caste system. And the caste system is kind of integrated very closely with Hinduism. It's a social hierarchy of classifications of people. Originally, there were like 3 classes. There were the priests, the warriors, and then kind of like everybody else. And now it's become much more complex, much more, there's a lot more different groups, subgroups, and that makes it really confusing, I'm sure. But it all relates back to that you have a dharma, which is your duty, and your duty is to like fulfill your purpose in life. And as you do this, you go up the chain in trying to achieve a higher caste. And with bad deeds, you go to a lower caste. So I believe they could call that term samsara. Whenever there's this whole reincarnation, and it's similar to Buddhism. So I believe that you come back in the next life, your spirit does. There's the term samsara, the cycle of rebirth. So that is how they define reincarnation. It's a new body, a new life, but your soul is still kind of intact and moving on to the next life. But you wouldn't have understanding of that. You wouldn't know what you were in a previous life. You probably heard of this term karma before. It's the action, refers to all the actions a person does in their life, and this is what's going to affect the samsara, the reincarnation. A good John Green video here that you could access through the notes that have been uploaded. 4 branches of Hinduism that mainly focus on various gods. That's why I kind of said that not all types of Hinduism are exactly the same. Some things you might be familiar with, there's the temples. You would see a lot of these, of course, in India. Lots of traditions here of lighting candles and lamps, offering food and drink and flowers to gods. You'll see these things. Meditation is a key component of Hinduism. Almost all the homes also have those shrines that I talked about. I think there's a video at the very end that probably will show some of those things. Here's a couple of their festivals and holidays. Probably Diwali is the one that you're more likely to have heard of. The fall harvest festival that celebrates good triumphing over evil. And as far as similarities go with other religions, I would say that it definitely is very different. But even things like purification in water, kind of a symbolism of baptism, would be one kind of component that I would say is how they're similar. But as far as we talked about, like Judaism and Islam and Christianity have a lot of parallels. I don't think you're going to see those parallels as closely with Hinduism. And I think I skipped over this. It's mentioned in the slide. Probably one of the most famous Hindu people that you have heard of is a man by the name of Gandhi. And Gandhi kind of led the people of India in trying to achieve their independence from Britain. He was a person that greatly inspired Martin Luther King Jr. in his civil rights quest for equality for African Americans. So we will talk about Gandhi later on when we actually cover India. It's a really interesting figure, a lot of interesting things that he said, a lot of powerful words that have said that are still known today by people. So that kind of concludes what I wanted to tell you a little bit about Hinduism.